It's that time of the year. The Ashes, of course, is upon us. Early morning viewing if you're an Indian fan, and if you're an English fan, well, it's the late hours. It's the ungodly hours which you'll have to tune in towards the Ashes, but it's going to be riveting. It's Pat Cummins, Australia, of course, hosting Joe Root's England. And this time it's Australia defending the Ashes, and we have a special guest to join us and tell us about what we need to know going into this mammoth marquee event, like it always is. We have, of course, James Buttler from the Cricket Badger podcast, who, of course, is just the finest brain in the gentleman's game. James, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for that build-up.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the Ashes. I mean, there's so much hullabaloo going into this with the fact that the COVID and, of course, a few players with the Tim Payne thing. I mean, tell me if this Ashes hasn't been built up already.
Every Ashes is built up. I mean, I feel a little bit strange sometimes. I mean, we played India obviously recently. England did, say we, and uh, a lot of people suggested that was almost like a warm-up Test series. Not at all. India, the best side in the world in Test cricket, but the Ashes does hold a very special place in the hearts of Australians and the English. It's a long, fight for the urn, and it's going to be exceptional. I think over the next couple of months. Looking forward to it tremendously. I'm trying to get into Australian time. I'm doing quite a bit of work around the Ashes series. That's going to be difficult. I'm going to be tired, I think, for the next 2 months, but it'll be worth it.
It will be worth it. No one doubts that indeed. And look at the head to head in terms of the series. I think it's 33-32, if my numbers do me right now. But when was your first Ashes, by the way? The one that you
Oh,
covered,
blimey.
just for curiosity's sake?
The first one I mean, I can remember Botham's Ashes in '81. I was at school then.
Yeah.
And I can remember coming out of school, and one of the teachers who knew I liked cricket said to me, "They've won. Bob Willis has taken 8 wickets." So that was probably the earliest memory of the Ashes, but I've watched them ever since. And I can remember as a child under the covers with the radio on, trying to not get to sleep, but ending up dozing off in the end. But listening to the Ashes down under, because obviously in England, it's the other side of the world, so effectively the 12 hours difference roughly. So
Yep.
their nighttime is our daytime, so that makes it very difficult for English people to stay tuned. But going to do my best over the next 2 months.
Yeah, I presume a lot of coffee and hot chocolate or maybe other beverages. Only time will tell. But you
that's
mentioned the
that's my
80s.
general day.
Absolutely. You mentioned the 80s there, James. I want to, of course, throw up a couple of numbers right now because it's been woeful performances for England in Ashes Test Down Under. And the numbers, well, look away if you're an England fan right now. James, walk me through decade by decade because it's not much to really show.
Yeah, I mean, the last time England won down under the 2010-11 series, when they won 3-1 under the captaincy of Andrew Strauss, that was their only success in the last 34 years. That's 8 series involved in that. And since that success, England have played 10 test matches. They've not won a single test match. They've drawn one and lost the other 9. Home advantage, as we've seen in test series, regardless of whether it's the Ashes or not, is crucial, isn't it, these days? And obviously, it's going to play its part this time around as well. So the Australians go in as favourites. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's going to be maybe closer than some people are anticipating. This is certainly not a vintage English side, but it's certainly not a vintage Australian side either. We saw, obviously, India the last twice they've been there for the Border Gavaskar Trophy. India have upset the apple cart to some degree, and they've beaten Australia on home soil. Second time around, doing it with very much the B team. So England will take a lot of heart from that. I think the Indian performances. It's all about, though, getting the big scores on the board in the first innings. You need to go big in Australia to put pressure on the opposition. The tosses are going to be crucial as well. And from an English standpoint, you hope that on a good batting track, Joe Root calls right, and they can put 450 on the board.
Indeed, I mean, there are lots of captains who've not had the right decision at the Gabba, and I don't want to mention Nasser Sen, but it eventually comes up. Let's, of course, ask you about Root and his batting prowess against Australia. But before that, I was just looking at the press conference of Joe Root, and a couple of things really stuck to me. Now, he said, look, the India series, we were really in it, and it was nip and tuck, which was fair, and no one will dispute that. But another important point that he mentioned is that those half an hour periods, which really cost England, now, against Australia, in Australia, it's critical that these areas are ticked off. Do you think this English team can probably do something that, 2010 that they did?
I mean, what you've just said there, really, and what Root has said is Test cricket, isn't it? You know, you can be even Stevens, have the best of the first two sessions of the day, but then if you have a bad half an hour, you throw the baton back to the opposition. And those half an hour periods you get in Test matches can make a huge amount of difference. And the better teams in the world win more of those half an hours than they lose, and obviously then win the series off the back of that. I think England have got a real chance. I think they do. I think whether they can actually win the series and bring the Ashes home is possibly a step too far, but I certainly think they can win at least one Test match, if not two, and put pressure on the Australians this time around. As I say, a lot's talked about David Warner being Stuart Broad's bunny. You've got Marnus Labuschagne and Steve Smith crucial in their batting department. If they don't have stellar series, then England will be rubbing their hands with that. So there's plenty of England to get at. But then if you're Australian, looking the other way, Joe Root has been phenomenal, hasn't he? In the last, this year, this calendar year, he's scored ridiculous amounts of runs, and he needs to perform. He needs to perform, but he needs other English batsmen to stand up alongside of him and to score centuries of their own.
Yeah, and speaking of centuries, Joe Root hasn't got one in Australia, and that's something that he'll definitely want to get off his back. Speaking of Root and his numbers, let's get it on the screen then, because look, his Ashes record, you can really pick the bones out of it, but what strikes you here is 38 is an average in Australia. Now, he only fares worse in Bangladesh and Ireland, but he's played, 2 tests and 1 test respectively. And Australia is perhaps his worst in terms of the bat. So, Joe Root, I know he's in sublime form. James, what can you tell me? Can he make these numbers better?
I mean, that's his task, isn't it, to make the numbers better? He scored 1,455 runs in 23 innings this year, averaging of 66.14. He scored 6 centuries, which is I think it's equaled the record for an English batsman in a calendar year. He'll be hoping to add to that, obviously, in the next couple of Test matches. And if he can do that, and as I say, a few of the others stand up and bat alongside of him, then those big first innings scores can be key. But Joe Root is certainly going to be, obviously, the wicket that the Australians prize more than any other. They'll want to try and get him out, which will put pressure on everybody else. Obviously, Ben Stokes is a decent batsman as well, but the averages of the rest of the English batsmen are nowhere near what Joe Root's capable of. So he is going to be very, very key. And I've heard him say as well, he's going to be remembered. This is probably going to be how his captaincy, his tenure as captain of England is going to be remembered. What they do over the next 2 months. If he can bring back the Ashes urn, he's already got good stats as captain. He'll go down as one of the greats of English cricket. In terms of captaincy, I think he's probably already going to be there as a batsman. But if he has a poor series and England come home, dare I say it, with 4-0, 5-0 on the scoreboard, then Joe Root's captaincy is going to be sour to some degree. So there's a lot on his shoulders, I think, over the next 2 months.
Let's see how that unfolds. It's great to see all these subplots in the grander narrative, which is the Ashes. Now, speaking of subplots, James Anderson, because we touched upon the batting there from an English lens. The bowling, I know Anderson perhaps might not get all 5 tests, or I don't know, dare I say he does. But let's take a look at his numbers, James, and tell me about how he is, because you look at those strike rates, it's kind of contrasting, even though there's nothing much in it, or would you beg to differ?
It's a tough place for English bowlers to go. I mean, Jimmy Anderson's obviously, I mean, you call him in India Clouderson, which I think is a little bit unfair on his skills. But I think obviously going to Australia with a Kookaburra ball, you don't quite get the zip off the seam and the swing in the air that he maybe gets at home. But those figures, I mean, in Australia, a lot of people would take that, wouldn't they? As stats down under. He's going to be crucial, isn't he? Jimmy Anderson, Stuart Broad as well, the 2 seasoned campaigners of England's bowling lineup. If they can have a good series as well, and they can maybe get a little bit from that Kookaburra ball that we've not seen before. And I heard Mark Wood talking the other day about it's the lengths you bowl in Australia. You need to bowl Australian lengths. I see a lot of Australian bowlers come to England, and in their first couple of games, they're bowling far too short. And in England, that doesn't work. But in Australia, you get that little bit of extra bounce. Aim for the top of off stump kind of thing and get that little bit of extra bounce. That causes batsmen problems. So it's going to be very interesting, I think, this series to see how England bowl. You've got going back to root, but Pat Cummins coming in as Australian captain. You've got the number one bowler in the world taking on the number one batsman in the world. And one of the joys of having a bowler appointed as the Australian captain is that you do get that head-to-head. The two captains will go head-to-head because usually it's two number 3 or two number 4 batsmen, and you don't see them really in direct combat. But we will see that in the Ashes, which is going to be fascinating.
Yeah, it's food for thought. That's a riveting prospect indeed. And it starts on the 8th of December, early 5:30 start. So you can guys catch it on cricket.com in terms of all the analysis and stats. And we'll, of course, get more of James through the course of
That
the
is a
Ashes.
lot. That is a lot more civilized. 5:30 starts a lot more civilized than my midnight, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a bowl of cereal and plenty of coffee, of course, because 5:30, we've not been used to those in India of late with, of course, India Tour of England, the IPL and the T20 World Cup. So reasonably early hours, but I mean, it's the Ashes. That's the beauty of Australian cricket down under. Final one from me, James, before you give you a prediction. Sorry, it was Pat Cummins telling me that he's going to do his press conference next. No, jokes apart, though, prediction in a bit, but I've just seen pictures of that Brisbane pitch, has a green tinge to it. Would you perhaps be licking your lips if you're a bowler, or is that premature to say right now?
Absolutely premature. I think you'll see that pitch looking a completely different beast, I think, in 2 days' time. They've left a bit of grass on it. The journalists that are out there that are taking those pictures probably are thinking, oh, keep it like that if you're English. But I think that they'll trim that top off. They'll take it right down to the a few millimeters, and it will be brown. It'll be hard. It'll be fast. The Gabba tends to be that way. I don't think it'll be anywhere near green by the time we come to the day one and the first ball of the Ashes is bowled.
Yeah, we saw that in 2005. I think it was Ricky Ponting at the Edgbaston test, and he won the toss and he decided to bowl, but then it turned out to be a real flat deck, and I think Triscottic and Stars just went about their business. Right. Predictions, are you going to go for 5-nillers like Swan, McGrath, and other guests in our show, or are you going to go for something more nip and tuck?
I'm taking it, Avanish, that Graham Swan went 5-0 to England, did he?
Yeah, of course, and he was wenting post the semi-final disaster, but that's for another conversation. But he went final England. McGraw always goes final Australia. Are you going to be one of them, or are you going to think this is going to turn out like 2019, 2-2?
I think it's going to be closer than people think. I think the way obviously the fifth Test match, we don't know where the venue for that's going to be. There is a little bit of rain forecast for Test match number 1. I'm clutching at straws here from an English side of things, but if England can get away from the Gabba without defeat, the second Test match is a day-night pink baller, which might help the likes of Chris Wokes and Jimmy Anderson to get the ball to do a little bit. So we could find that England are 1-0 up after 2, and then who knows from there. And if the fifth Test match then comes back to Melbourne, as some people tip, then that would have to be a day-night Test match as well. So that could play into England's hands as well. But that aside, Australia are going to be very, very difficult to beat. They're going to, Steve Smith, if he carries on, if he does what he's done before, and he scores, I mean, he's burnt on my retinas from the last series down under, because I never saw anybody else bat. He just seemed to be batting all the time. So if Australia play their part, I think Pat Cummins looks like a very good, safe pair of hands, and Steve Smith will be helping him with the captaincy. I'm going to go with 2-2.
2-2 it is. Of course, that would have been something in terms of not sitting on the fence from James, but unfortunately he's on 2-2. He can't really put a winner out here. But that's your call. I mean,
That's
essentially,
not enough for England, Avanish, is it? Because Australia hold the Ashes urn. That famous 10.5 centimetre trophy would stay in Australia if it does finish 2-2. So it wouldn't be enough for Joe Rootsman, but I think they could come back with their heads held high if it's a 2-2 draw.
Yeah, remember, this is the second Ashes, which has more to play for in terms of the World Test Championship. So both sides can't have a 4-0 or 5-0 against them. But James, on that note, thank you so much. And good luck, of course, to England, because you're watching it from there. Are you going to be covering in Australia, England? How does it work for you?
I'm going to be in England, so I'm going to be on very antisocial hours. I'm going to be nocturnal. I'm commentating on some of it, and I'll be watching the rest of it as well. And really looking forward to it. I'm just hoping, just going back to the start, I'm hoping England get a good start. Not because necessarily that's going to mean England go on and win it, but I think the good start to the series from an England perspective means that we take the series all the way through the 5 matches and there's still something riding on it. The worst that can happen, as has happened a couple of times recently, is for the Ashes to be done after 3 test matches. Hopefully that's not the case this time. Hopefully Joe Root's men can land a few punches early on, and we take it all the way through to that 5th test match.
Okay, let's see, of course, who draws first blood. And like I said, catch it cricket.com, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and of course, check out James and the Cricket Badger podcast. I hope I got that one right. James, thank you. You promised us 10 minutes. We've taken 15 off you. Typical of us, but nevertheless, it's been fun.
Avanesh, always a problem. Oh wait, no, always a problem. Always a joy.
No worries, it's fine. Thanks so much.
That was not a Freudian slip, I promise you. It's always a pleasure.
That's all right. Right, so that was James Buttler just shedding light on what's going to truly be a compelling Ashes, of course. Pardon me for WhatsApps, doorbells, and phones going off. It's been that kind of day, really, with the cricket going on and ending, some would say, with India, New Zealand. Thanks so much for watching. There's plenty of content coming up this week, so subscribe, like I said. Until then, it's a goodbye from me.